Hello and welcome to our lecture on leadership and the project manager. This is an exciting chapter to walk with you through. I think that the idea of leadership will have benefits in whatever career, whatever job opportunities you end up working on. Having the mindset and the awareness of what leadership is and how it fits in and how you can be a leader, I think will be very beneficial to you. Leadership is the ability to inspire confidence and to draw support among the people who are needed to achieve the goals. And that's a generic definition that our book uses, but it gets to the idea that it's about team building, it's about consensus building, it's about getting people to work together. And it's not a specific definition, but we all understand the idea of leaders, and we all know that leadership is important. And what this class we've been talking about in this book has been project management, and project managers really need to have good leadership skills. In fact, I would even say that all project managers are expected to be leaders, but not all leaders are expected to be project managers. So you may never be a project manager, and that's completely fine, but you can still benefit this chapter in particular as we talk about the role of leadership, because that is not limited to just project managers. That can work for anything. It can work for parents in a family. It can work for a career counselor. It can work for a pastor at a church. It can work for anyone. It's a very, very useful skill. Now, I had to have a pointy-haired boss image here. We think about leadership. The worst leader that I know probably is Scott Adams, boss for Dilbert. Who's your leader? Go on, say it. You are. He admits it's terrible. And you might be thinking, well, how am I any better than the pointy-haired boss? How am I more qualified to accept a leadership opportunity, a leadership role when it comes around? Hopefully, as you read this chapter, as you go through this audio presentation, as you do the material associated with the chapter, you'll realize that you have the potential to be a leader yourself. Now, this isn't in our book, but I think it's worth pointing out, remembering that there's a difference between a project and a process, and there's therefore a difference between a project manager and a process manager. A process manager is basically just a manager, right? Because processes are about the ongoing day-to-day activities, just keeping the same old, selling the colored sugar water, Coca-Cola, the same way this year that we did for the last 20 years. So when we think about a manager, we're really talking about a process manager. And when we're thinking about a product, we're thinking about a project, we're thinking about something new and innovative and kind of changes the way we make our goods or services. It does something that shakes up the system a little bit. And a manager is involved in that project as well, but it's so different than the traditional day-to-day process manager that we don't just say, when we say manager, we don't assume that it's a project manager. We kind of use the PM or project manager term to talk about somebody managing a project. And it's a good idea, again, to keep in mind that the difference between these. Now, leadership is more about innovation than it is about keeping things steady. So it makes sense that leadership is especially important in project managers because there's so much innovation and change going on there. But even a day-to-day manager, a process manager, would benefit from leadership because within the confines of here's how we do things at XYZ company, there's still the opportunity to do some slight innovation within that tried and true method and make the process even a little more efficient. So, leadership and managing, these are different terms. They mean different things. Managers have an official title. A manager is a title given by an organization that means you have the responsibility and the authority to use resources, to do, to make decisions, to do things. And typically, certainly in a process manager role, the traditional definition of a manager role, your job is to maintain the status quo, to make sure the widgets are still being shipped out on time, at the same high quality that the company always uses, with the same number of resources, the same cost, and so on. Leadership is really, if we boil it down, it's about interpersonal communication, interpersonal relationships. It's how you deal with other people and how you help other people deal with even more people. It's about personal relationships and interpersonal relationships. And there's a lot of change in our lives. You're not the person you were 5 years ago. You're probably not the person you were 5 days ago. I'm certainly not the person I was 5 years ago, and this week was different than last week and the week before it, and I'm learning new things, becoming a new person. So anything related to people is going to have an inherent change with it. You read a new book, you watch a new movie, you have a new conversation. You're constantly in the process of changing, much more than a machine is, much more than a desk is, much more than a schedule on a spreadsheet is changing. People are changing. So leadership, as it involves people and relationships, it also lends itself inherently to change and innovation. Project managers, again, it's a combination of both. It's an official title with official responsibilities within the organization, but it's also charged with working with people to come up with new projects, goods or services, for the company in an innovative way. And we can see this was a chart from our book here where they talk about some of the differences there. Looking at the outcomes line near the bottom, a manager seek to maintain the status quo, producers seek to change the status quo, and so on. So how does the project manager lead? What are the characteristics of our project management and leadership? One thing to realize is that project managers combine hard skills, technical skills, project management, timeline management, budget management, specific numerical processes, and it also involves softer skills, people skills, problem-solving skills, interpersonal skills, conflict resolution. Being a project manager is a great way to move up the corporate ladder. In fact, you're like a miniature, a baby CEO, a baby company executive when you're a project manager, because you're dealing with both the technical and the human resource softer skills and softer challenges that exist that are so critical for success at senior executive levels. So it's a great opportunity to develop and hone those skills. 4 elements that our book talks about for project managers that we're going to look at in these next 4 slides. Acquiring resources, motivating and building teams, having a vision and fighting fires, kind of the big and the small, and then the importance of communication. So let's talk about these 4 in turn: resources, motivation, vision, and communication. So first of all, resources. Typically when a project gets initially started, it's underfunded. And there's a variety of reasons for this, that projects are underfunded, and part of it is because the projects themselves are not always super well defined. We know the general idea, but we don't know exactly what it's going to cost, so we can't have a detailed budget for something that is ill-defined, like which is very different than we can say how much it's going to cost to produce a specific new Corvette on the assembly line. We know exactly what the raw materials are going to cost. We know exactly what the manual labor hours are going to be. We know exactly what the cost of that next automobile is going to be on a factory line. With a project, that's not the case, because projects are so different. So we don't know a good estimate, so we've got vague goals, and therefore we're not going to commit budgetary resources excessive at the beginning. There's often not a sponsor for the project, that there's nobody at the senior level that's pushing for us. Now we will talk about champions in this chapter. But if you don't have a champion up front, you're not going to get the sponsor. And if you do have a champion, you're still not necessarily going to get the funds up front because of that uncertainty. Sometimes projects and the project manager who's trying to propose the new project, sometimes they intentionally understate the price just to get the ball rolling, because once a project gets going, and if it gets some traction and has some success early on, it's easier to ask for a little more money later than it is to say, oh, by the way, this thing is going to cost $90,000 or $5 million or whatever it is. It's a big number to the organization for the effort. There's also not enough funds to go around. I mean, every organization is limited in its resources. We talked about the need to choose projects, one project versus another project. Had an entire chapter on how do I decide between projects, because we have a finite number of resources, so we can't just go and fund every project that we want to at whatever price they want to ask for it. And there's also quite frankly an attitude of distrust sometimes between top management and project managers that your project stepping on my toes a little bit and I don't want to give it full support. So we see these acquiring resources is something that project managers have to do because the project needs resources. It's probably under resourced. A process manager doesn't have to do that as much because it's already built into the process is what it's going to cost, and he's already got the resources there. So it's one of the challenges. The second of these four elements of the roles of project manager is motivating the team members and building the teams up. And again, I'm a movie fan. Office Space is one of the the real classics from, I think it's about 12 years or 15 years old now. It's been quite a while. Jennifer Aniston's in it. When she was still not a lead character there, but she's very, very funny in this in a small part. And the movie's just fantastic. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and rent it this weekend. If you have seen it, go ahead and rent it again because it's very funny. And but this line is in there. It's not that I'm lazy, I just don't care, is what one of the characters says when he's talking about his job and doing a poor job of his job. And part of the reason that he doesn't care is because he's being managed very poorly. But the point of that line, the reason I put that in there is because it's great, and this I'm quoting directly from our book here because they say it so well. So this is directly from our text. It is important to realize that motivation ultimately comes from within each of us. It cannot be stimulated solely by an external presence. Each of us decides whether we will become motivated to do the work we have been assigned. Motivation ultimately comes down to a personal choice. So, the fair question to ask is, well, then does a project manager have any ability to do motivation? And the answer is yes. It's partially out of our control, yes, because the person, if you decide no matter what you do, I can't, you're not going to make me do my work. And again, I should put a slide as I think about it now. I think about Wally from the Dilbert comic strip, because no matter what anybody tries to get him to do, pointy-haired boss or Dilbert or Alice or anybody, he doesn't do any work. So you can't make somebody work. But it's not hopeless. There is something you can do. It's part of being a good manager is to look at what it is that motivates a person and to help them see how their goals can be reached by being a team player, by working on this project, on this particular project. The third of the four characteristics of a project manager is having a vision and fighting fires. Now, what do we mean by having a vision and fighting fires? Those are two very different things, but it has to do with dealing with the boundaries, the technical and behavioral human boundaries, interpersonal boundaries, and then there's the big picture, 50,000 foot, and the low-level details of making it work. The boundaries there. The day-to-day low-level stuff is sometimes called, you're putting out the fires. You're not doing anything strategic or long-term vision or plan related. You're just making sure that the phones have been answered, making sure that the product gets moved from point A to point B today. Make sure that the customer gets a response, whatever it is. And again, our book said something along these lines. Our book quoted an executive, and the executive's quote said this, that we seek people who can see the forest for the trees, so they've got the big picture, they're not getting lost, but at the same time, they're intimately familiar with the species of each variety of tree that we grow. So I know the details of the business, but I also understand it at a very big picture vision perspective, 50,000 foot executive vision. If one of the trees, one of the resources, one of the people, one of the products that we create, whatever it is, one of the details in our company becomes sick, they know how to they know the best formula to fix it quickly. So somebody that can handle the day-to-day details but can also step back at a big picture and understand where it is we're going and what we're doing, so you're not lost in those details. Again, the trees and the forest is a common analogy. And then the fourth element of a project manager, and this is really important, is the role of communication. It is absolutely critical that you do that you maintain good communication with the stakeholders. There's a great line that says, if the stakeholders know nothing about what you're doing, then they're going to assume that you're doing nothing. Right? If you're not telling the stakeholders the great things you're doing, they're not going to just assume that great things are happening. When great things happen, people brag about it, people talk about it. So you want to be constantly talking about your project to all the stakeholders, communicating with them what's going on. I like to recommend having an elevator speech. And this isn't in our book, but I think it's a great thing, and you'll hear other faculty tell you the same thing and other people tell you the same thing. If you ever have the opportunity to just sit there, you're riding in an elevator, so it's a 30 seconds, 20 or 30 seconds with somebody, and you've kind of got their attention. You can talk about the sports, you can talk about the weather, or you can just kind of say, hey, that project, and this is somebody, a stakeholder, somebody that understands, knows who you are as a project manager, and knows what the project is, but they're not up to date on what's happened in the last day, last week, last month. You use those 20 seconds to kind of bring them up to speed. Oh, we got the new, the widget has, successfully gone through testing, and we got the approval from, the state to start building the device, and we got, good price quote from the something, whatever it is, whatever's going on, to give a 20-second news story, to give a 20-second elevator pitch. So you're not saying, oh, hey, let me catch you up to speed, and let me go get my PowerPoint slide and sit down here for 15 minutes, I'll go through it. No, just a real quick bring them up to speed. Another way of saying this, in our book does say this, is you're a mini billboard for the project. That you're just constantly, when people see you, they think about the project, because they know that's what you're going to talk about, they know that's what you're going to share the good news. Whatever's going on that's good, you're going to talk about it. Whatever's going on that's a challenge, you're going to treat that as an opportunity, and look for new ideas and be innovative and creative. And the other thing they talk about in communication in the book, which is really good, and I really like this, they're talking about running an efficient project meeting. We all go to meetings, and meetings sometimes drag on far too long, and they have too much information in them. So the project manager's job is to run the meetings and use those meetings as an opportunity for communication. Now, our book breaks this up into two kinds of meetings. There's task-oriented behavior in a meeting, and there's group maintenance behavior inside of a meeting. Now, the task-oriented behavior in a meeting is structuring process and stimulating communication and clarifying communication, summarizing, testing consensus, getting a vote. Do we all still want to go this? Do we understand what's going on here? Are we all in agreement on this? Do we, adding a little more clarity or comprehension to the group? Those are all task-oriented behavior. Staying on task. Let's do what's right in front of us. Let's get the job done. Now, group maintenance, again, is getting away from the details, and it's getting more into the, well, how are we feeling about this project? What are we thinking about this project? Where are the tensions? Who's frustrated? Who feels like they're being overworked? Who feels like, they're doing too much? Who feels like their work's not being appreciated? Who feels like, whatever these things are. Are we solving the problem here? Have we identified the problem? Are the steps working? Are what we're doing working? As opposed to just, hey, we got a deadline this Friday, we got to get this report written, and wait a second, before we write the report, are we even happy with the data ourselves? In my opinion, I am much more excited to go to a meeting that focuses on the group maintenance and those kinds of the outcomes associated with that. Making sure that everybody's working together equally, but keeping the tension low, keeping the hostility low, making sure everybody feels valued and appreciated, having the proper kind of exchange of information, not the details that I can pass along through email or phone call, but the kinds of things that are the deeper communication that are best done face to face. So that task-oriented stuff I kind of graded out in this slide, because from my take, my recommendation to you as a future project manager or as a future leader, not necessarily in a project management role, but in a leader role where communication matters, and you're running a project, you're running a meeting, my recommendation is that you do as much of the communication that can be done through email or phone, you do it in that format. And you treat your face-to-face meeting time as a very valuable commodity, and you use that time to work on the group, to work on the people, because the people matter more. Leadership is about people. And when you have people together, you need to realize I have the most valuable resource I'm going to have at any point during the day when I've got my people here with me. and I want to maximize and focus on the people rather than focusing on information that can be emailed just as easily when the meeting's over. Okay, that's my 2 cents on that. Our book talks about this emotional intelligence, which I thought was a nice insight here, a nice thing to bring up. The idea on emotional intelligence is very different than intellectual intelligence. It's not IQ. It's not what you know. It's about your person, your self-awareness, your self-regulation, your motivation, your empathy, your social skills. How good are you at these things? It's, again, just as leadership is about relationships, emotional intelligence is about relationships, not results. So it's not what you know, your intelligence, but it's how you function personally and interpersonally with other people. And remember, this is important because project management and leadership is first and foremost about people management. And you may say, wait a second, why is project management about people management? Well, remember, process management or traditional management, the process, everything's already in place. You're just keeping the system moving. When it comes to a project, you've got people doing something new and innovative. So the people matter more. Maybe at the end of the project, the product that you've created, the service, the good, whatever it is that's the tangible end result of the project, maybe matters at the end. But certainly as you're going through the process, the people matter more because that's all that exists. That's all that's there. And I think even at the end of the process, even at the end of the project, the end result of the activity, people still matter more than the end result. Traits of effective project leaders. Now this is interesting. Our book kind of talks about this, and I had to read this a couple times to make sure I understood what they were saying there. They're looking at multiple surveys and data and reports that are out there, and the bottom line is there is no single best trait for all project leaders across all industries, for all organizations, large and small, manufactured goods and service goods, and all the possibilities there. There isn't a single answer. But they looked at multiple collection research results, and they kind of pulled those all together. So one of the surveys involved over 2,000 managers, and they asked the managers what they considered to be the most important characteristics of effective leaders. And it was interesting, I think, that managers considered honesty. Say what you mean, and keep your promises. They had that as the #1 criteria. And I don't know if that's the standard they have for themselves, or if it's just because they're managers themselves, they need the honest feedback from the people they're working with so they can do their work. But honesty was #1 in that. Now, some other surveys had other important characteristics, and they weren't necessarily talking to managers. They may have been talking to team members. They may have been talking to executive level people. But good communication was high on that list, and that's not a surprise. Good communication always ranks very high among soft skills. Both oral and written communication, you'll find both of those rate very high in most surveys of even technical people. They want the technical people to be able to complement their technical knowledge with good communication. Flexibility and flexibility to deal with ambiguity. Being creative problem solver. It gets called many different things, but the opposite of being rigid and, hey, this is my job and this is what I was hired to do and I don't really care about anything else. That's not a very good team player. That's not very flexible. What you want is you want somebody that can deal with changing environments and ambiguity and uncertainty. And problem solving is another phrase that sometimes gets used because that's the same idea there. Working well in a project team, working well with others. If you're a person who is hard to talk to, even though you're in the group, but you're, not the communication skill, but just your body language, just your attitude. Nobody wants to work with you. Nobody wants to share information with you. Nobody wants to get information from you. I mean, that's bad for the team. And again, you'll see that all these things are reported in anything. If you sit there and Google today, what are the important soft skills, or what are companies looking for, you're going to find these kinds of things: good communication and flexibility, problem solving, creativity, teamwork. These skills are always going to show up. Honesty, integrity, skilled at various tactics, right? Being able to do different skills and manual skills. And there's a table there that another survey had, and other results were there: leading by example and being visionary and being technically competent. So all these ideas are going to show up there. Nobody's going to say, yeah, I want somebody that's dishonest, I want somebody that's not trustworthy, I want somebody that is going to lie to me or stab me in the back or put themselves first. Those skills, if you've got any of those skills, it's going to work against you, and you need to recognize that, and you need to wipe that out of your life, not just professionally, but also for your family and for yourself. Here's another thing that was introduced in this chapter that I thought was a bit novel and I think useful. This idea of your temporal orientation, your timeline orientation. This is a potentially an interesting idea. I actually thought this was a bit new in my thinking, and I always like to learn and always like to be different, so I enjoyed this. One of the things was this idea of your timeline orientation. People tend to see themselves, according to this, and I've done a little bit of extra Googling on this and reading on this, and there seems to be some support for it. It's not a mainline premise that just dominates groupthink culture, but there does seem to be some merit here about people tend to be either past focused, present focused, or future focused in terms of how they think about themselves, in terms of the framework or the context of what you're thinking. And there's advantages to whatever your focus is. If you're focused on the past, for example, that actually helps you with problem solving. It helps you with evaluating other team members or evaluating processes that have gone on in the past and learning lessons. If you have a natural bent toward thinking in the past, recapturing the past is what they call that at the bottom, that's a temporal skill that follows from a past timeline orientation. Now, if you're a future person, if your thinking is toward the future, you may not be as good at problem solving and recognizing how today's problem is similar to something we did a month ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, and here's how we solved this 5 years ago, and we can try it again today. But you would be good eventually for creating a vision for the future, or for making contingency plans for the future and things that can happen, and so on. So this was just an interesting little section there that I encourage you to read and think through. And at the end of the chapter, and this isn't in our chapter, you have to flip to the end of the chapter where they have the summary material and what's after the summary. They had this little section in here on just future time perspective scale. And there's probably one of these for present time and past time, and a number of these that are available. But here's 10 questions. And you can answer these strongly disagree or strongly agree or anything in between those, and it helps you rate how much you are a future time perspective person. I never feel as if time is standing still. Strongly disagree would be a 1, strongly agree would be a 5, and anything in between. Living for the future is important in my life. Strongly disagree, strongly agree, anything in between. I always plan things ahead, right? And you can fill this out and circle through the numbers, and what ends up happening is if all your circles, if they kind of are leaning to the right, then you have a bent, a tendency toward being a future, having a future time orientation. And similar questions could come up for questions to test if you're present or if you're past. Now, I mentioned project champions earlier. The idea of a champion is you've got somebody who's really going to be vested in the project. They're going to use more than just supportive of it and I'll vote for it on a vote. I mean, they were going to actively be involved in using their resources to promote, to push for the project, even against resistance, when there's a certain level of resistance. It's easy to push for something, it's easy to promote something when nobody's resisting, or everybody's in favor of it. At that point, you're just on the bandwagon. You're not a champion. But you're a champion when you're pushing for something when other people are arguing against it. Well, the resource would be better allocated this way, or it'd be, I don't agree with this. It'd be better to go with a different approach. So that would be one definition of a champion. Another definition of a champion, I forget who said this, but it was a book author, I think they said. Tom Peters or somebody said that champions are fanatics in the single-minded pursuit of their pet ideas, and he uses the word of fanatic. So a champion isn't just somebody who's quietly voting yes. When you get a champion, you get somebody that is going to go above and beyond to see something to success. And we identify in the book 4 different sources that a champion can come from. It can be a creative originator, somebody who builds something that he's in like, wow, this has real potential. It can be an entrepreneur, and I mentioned both of those before I give the examples because Apple was founded by Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, and that was kind of their roles. Wozniak was actually the technical person who built the computers, the Apple I, the Apple II, all the little devices. He was the electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, build the devices. And Steve Jobs saw the device and knew the power, the impact, the influence that it was going to have, and he became the champion in the entrepreneur sense. He became the one who took up the cause and was blowing his horn and standing on the soapboxes and screaming and yelling and helping everybody understand that this was the way to go. Another champion can come from a senior level executive manager, somebody who has a lot of clout and a lot of sway. That would be a godfather or a sponsor role of a champion, and that person can often make things happen in a way different than the technical creative person or the entrepreneur can. Now there aren't that many senior level managers in an organization, so if you get one of them to be a champion for you, then that's a very, very good thing. And then project managers. Remember, the project manager in a sense is a champion for the project. And they don't say this quite as clear, or I didn't think so, but I'm going to call the project manager a traditional champion. And what do I mean by traditional champion? Because there are traditional duties that we associate, or that our book, when they explain this, kind of associates these with the role of a champion. Understanding the technical elements of the project, understanding, providing leadership, coordination and control, the details, and getting the resources we've already talked about, and doing the administrative paperwork, reporting. All those things are traditional duties. In fact, when we say you're given the title of manager, we're really talking about these kinds of things. This is what a manager is expected to do. Now, just being a manager doesn't mean you're a champion in the non-traditional duties, in the bigger cheerleading, visionary, politician, risk-taker, ambassador sense. So it's fair to say, at least in my mind here, when I think about these traditional duties, when I think about this category here, I'm thinking about the manager. And the manager could be also the cheerleader, the visionary, the politician, the risk-taker, the ambassador. But it doesn't have to be. Sometimes these are done by the godfather or by the entrepreneur. Sometimes they're done by the original, the creative originator of the project. Sometimes they're done by a team member in the project, but not the project manager. You've been on a group probably. You've been in a committee where the project manager was kind of, not very exciting, not just going through the technical duties, just making sure that we hit the next deadline and making sure that the reports get filled out properly, but not really a visionary, not really a cheerleader for what was going on. It was somebody else in the group, just a group member, just a project member, that was really the the champion of the project. It was really the one that was what was the word, fanatic about it. Like, look, this is what we're doing is really important. This is really good. We need to make this work. They talk about a study in the book where they looked at, I think, 45 projects or something like this, new projects that were being developed, and in corporate life and real things going on, real budgets, real people, real teams. And of those projects, 17 of the projects were successful. Of the successful projects, 16 of the 17 successful projects had a clear champion. And they don't say the champion was, how many was a godfather, a senior executive, how many was an entrepreneur, how many was a project manager that was also just a leader and champion. They don't really say what that breakdown is, but almost 100%, like 16 out of 17, had a champion of the successful projects. Now, what about the unsuccessful projects? Well, 27 out of the 28, again, almost 100% of those projects did not have a clearly identified champion. Now, they had a manager, of course, doing the traditional duties, but the non-traditional duties of a champion, the person that stands out and becomes a champion for the project, projects that failed didn't have that. Now, it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. Obviously, it didn't fail overnight, and as it started creeping toward failure, nobody was willing to champion it at that point. But how much of it did the project creep toward failure because the champion wasn't there from the beginning? It's difficult to say for sure, but it's compelling data that there was only one example of a project that succeeded without a champion, and there was only one example of a project that failed that had a clearly identifiable champion. So champions are, data strongly suggests that champions are a very, very good thing for your project success. So how do we make champions? Our book talks about identifying and encouraging their emergence, encouraging and rewarding risk takers, remembering the emotional connection, and freeing champions from traditional management. The idea of freeing champions from traditional management in particular, we're talking about kind of having a dedicated career path here, which is a nice thing. To where that's what I do is I manage projects, and I get better and better and better at managing projects because that's what I do most of my 40 hours a week at the organization that I'm working with. So they talk some about those things, and it makes sense. They also talk about this idea of a new project leadership. And I honestly don't know what they meant by new when our authors were talking here. I don't know if they mean it's a new model that's kind of emerging, if they're talking about or talking about a first-time project manager. You're new to the project management. I think they're just saying. I think we can almost take the word new out of there. I think we can just talk about project leadership and be consistent with what they're saying. This may be the new thinking on project management. Maybe that's what they're saying there. But 4 competencies determine a project leader's success. Understanding and practicing the power of appreciation. No manager does it alone. Nobody wins it alone. In sports, the athlete who scores a touchdown or makes a basket or hits a home run or something like that, and yeah, congratulations, you did your part of that process well. But if the team wins, it's not just because of you. It took the whole team playing together, and fans know that, and the players should know that. It's amazingly egotistical for somebody to act like they themselves won a team sport. And when it comes to business and it comes to teamwork and projects and leadership, you may be the project manager, and your team may end up delivering on time, on budget, and to specification, which is very rare and difficult to do. But that doesn't mean you get to stand up there and act like you did it all yourself. The team matters, and leadership is about people, and appreciating your team members is very important. And what leadership really comes down to then is finding those good team members and appreciating those good team members. And your job is not to whip them into shape, but rather to appreciate the skills and the gifts and the talents they have, and find the kind of people that are good fits for what's going on. Reminding people what's important. Right, again, we want to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction. I know I like to say that phrase a lot on these lectures, but it gets the idea across. because it really is unproductive for different people to be rowing in different directions. You can be rowing as hard as you can possibly row and wear yourself out, but you don't get anywhere. Yet if everybody's rowing in the same direction, nobody has to wear themselves out. Project leadership reminds everybody, here's what we're trying to do, here's our goals, and by focusing on those, we're going to be more productive. Generating sustaining trust, that was one of the things that was identified in at least a couple of those surveys, the importance of being trustworthy, of being honest, of people knowing what's going on. You want to do that as a project manager, and the new project leadership for sure is people be able to trust you, trust what you say, trust the information you're saying, trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do because you have the skill and the ability to do it and the commitment to getting it done. And then the new leader and the team members, they're allies. They're intimate allies, right? They again, we work together closely to get the job done. Project management professionalism. So here we're talking about the fact that project management, again, it's growing and growing and growing. We're in a world that is changing more and more rapidly than it ever has in the past. As changes come, there are winners and losers, and technology is disruptive, and disruptive technology creates winners, it creates losers. You want to be on the winning side, but part of being on the winning side is being proactive. And one way to be proactive is to do projects, because projects are the new and innovative kinds of things to do. As you continue to sell, colored sugar water for Coca-Cola, you're also working on innovative things to market that and sell that, and even have new products in the marketplace. So project work becoming the standard for many organizations. More and more of what an organization does is project-based. There's a critical need to update the skills for project workers, and in particular project managers. And there's a growing trend that project manager is what I do. So, hey, what are you? I'm an accountant. I'm a salesperson. I'm a project manager. Oh, really? So you're working on a project right now? Yes, I am. What are you going to do when that project ends? I'll pick up another project and I'll start working on it. And I'm not just doing one project. I'm probably managing 3 or 4 or 5 projects right now, and they're in various stages of their lifetimes. But I'm in charge of managing those projects. That is a viable and increasing job opportunity. NASA, back with the shuttle explosion all those years ago, realized that they lost some information. They weren't as effective in their project as they could have been if they had more trained and seasoned and professional, experienced people managing those projects. So they made a commitment to go ahead and just have project managers do that. So creating project managers, one thing you do is you can find your personalities, because some personalities work better, as you might guess, since we know that projects and leadership are all very people-oriented rather than detail-oriented. Outgoing, gregarious personalities are going to be a better fit for project managers. Accountants, kind of the opposite. Accountants tend to be better if you're a little introverted and detailed and nerdy. No offense to my accounting friends. But it's just the project managers and accountants are not the same personalities typically. Formalize the commitment to the project with training programs, so you're getting trained in these skills and practice and reinforcing these skills. The reward system for a project manager is a little bit different than the reward system for a traditional manager, or that it is for a person on the assembly line or a traditional salaried person. There's how you get bonuses, how you get recognition, how you get promotion. So there needs to be a recognition of that. And we need to understand and appreciate that accounting is a fine profession, and project management is a fine profession for some people, maybe even you at some point.